How do you convince a nation to surrender when its leaders refuse to believe what's right in front of them? One bomb, one aircraft, an entire city erased. Japan's military command saw the photographs, read the reports, listen to their own scientists. They didn't believe it. For 9 days, they chose denial, and it nearly cost them everything. If you're ready, let's begin. Part 1. The first reports. 90 feet beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo sat the underground war room. On the morning of August 6th, it hummed with the familiar rhythm of managed decline. Maps on every wall, American advances marked by red pins creeping closer each week. Then a decoded transmission arrived from Hiroshima. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. Blast radius exceeds all previous bombardment. Unknown weapon type. Casualties catastrophic. Request immediate. The message ended mid-word. The chief of the Imperial General Staff read it 3 times. His first instinct was logical. The Americans must have launched their largest conventional raid yet. Perhaps 500 B-29s dropping incendiaries simultaneously. Hiroshima covered 27 square miles. It housed 350,000 people. But reconnaissance reports told a different story. Weather observers had tracked only 3 B-29 aircraft over Hiroshima, not 300. Nothing in 3 years of air war suggested 3 aircraft could destroy an entire city. By mid-morning, pilots reported something unprecedented. A mushroom-shaped cloud rising over 40,000 feet, visible from 150 miles away, glowing with colors they had never seen. The first eyewitness account came from a railway official 15 miles outside the city. He described a flash brighter than the sun, followed by a pressure wave that knocked trains from their tracks. The entire city center had simply vanished. What he had witnessed was the detonation of Little Boy, a uranium weapon equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. An estimated 80,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would follow. The Supreme War Council convened that afternoon in silence. The war minister spoke first. American propaganda. They want us to believe they possess weapons they do not have. An admiral interrupted, something he would never have done under normal circumstances. 3 aircraft. Our radar tracked them. Our observers watched them. 3. The room fell silent. Part 2. The mathematics of denial. For 3 years, Japanese military doctrine had rested on a single premise. American industrial might could be overcome by spiritual strength. The Americans could produce more ships, more planes, more tanks. But Japanese forces would fight with such ferocity that American casualties would become politically unbearable. This calculation had guided every decision since Pearl Harbor, but a single bomb that could destroy a city changed everything. An intelligence officer presented the raw numbers. America had produced 88,000 tanks to Japan's 6,500, built 41 aircraft carriers to Japan's 15, but those comparisons no longer mattered. If the Americans can destroy entire cities with single bombs, he said, they are not fighting the same war we are fighting. The unspoken question hung over the room. If they have one such bomb, how many more are waiting? The initial assessment from the air defense staff offered a comfortable explanation. Hiroshima incident consistent with massive incendiary raid. Estimated 400 to 500 aircraft deploying new cluster bomb configuration. It fit within the framework of everything they understood. American bombers had already destroyed over 60 Japanese cities. Tokyo itself had lost 100,000 civilians in a single night during the firebombing raids of March 1945. Then the photographs arrived. Reconnaissance aircraft returned with images that defied explanation. Where Hiroshima's city center had been, there was simply absence. A perfect circle of obliteration extending 2 miles from a single point. No craters, no bomb patterns, nothing. To achieve this conventionally would require over 200 aircraft dropping their payload at the exact same moment. They had tracked 3. The photographs revealed something else. Steel buildings that had vaporized, a concrete bridge that appeared to have melted, and at the edges of the destruction zone, shadows burned into walls where people had stood before they ceased to exist. Part 3. The Committee. In Washington, American intelligence was listening to everything. Intercepted Japanese communications told a story of escalating confusion. Morning reports called it a large raid. By afternoon, communications with Hiroshima severed. By evening, entire city appears destroyed. This assessment must be an error. A physicist attached to the Manhattan Project recognized what the military analysts didn't. They think it's chemistry, he said. If they don't believe it's real, they won't surrender. You can't capitulate to a weapon you think is propaganda. That evening, the Supreme War Council convened again. 6 men stared at photographs of a city that had stopped existing. If this is what one bomb can do, one admiral said quietly, how many do they have? The war minister's response was immediate. We need scientific proof. Until we have that, we continue as planned. He wasn't seeking truth. He was seeking time. That night, the War Ministry established an investigation committee led by Japan's top nuclear physicist, Dr. Yoshio Nishina. But the committee's mission had been carefully worded. They weren't tasked with confirming whether an atomic bomb had been used. They were tasked with proving it hadn't. Part 4. What Nishina found. The official directive arrived at Nishina's laboratory on August 7th. One word stood out. Reassure. Not investigate. Not determine the truth. Reassure. The cruel irony. Nishina had spent 3 years leading Japan's own atomic bomb project. He knew exactly what it would take to build such a weapon, and he knew Japan had never come close, which meant he already knew what he would find. He reached Hiroshima at dawn on August 8th. The air felt wrong, thick, metallic. A strange heat radiated from the city center, and the silence. In a city of 350,000 people, there should have been sound. There was nothing. At 1 mile out, buildings stood, but were gutted. At half a mile, only steel frames remained. Closer still, there was simply nothing. Nishina stopped at what had been a bank. The concrete stairs remained, leading to a doorway that no longer existed. Burned into the stone was the outline of a person who had been sitting on those steps when the flash came. The stone still radiated heat. To create such an impression required temperatures of several thousand degrees, occurring in a fraction of a second. This was not chemistry. This was the conversion of matter into energy. That evening, Nishina wrote to a colleague, "If the Americans have developed an atomic weapon, we and our entire team should commit harakiri. What we attempted for years, they have achieved. There is no defense against this." But when he presented his findings to the committee the next day, he encountered deliberate disbelief. The intelligence chief dismissed his radiation measurements. Another member suggested the photographs might be fabricated. For every piece of evidence, they found an alternative explanation. The official report concluded that while a special type bomb had been used, its true nature remained scientifically uncertain. American intelligence intercepted that report. The key phrase, "evidence insufficient to confirm atomic weapon deployment." The intercepted orders continued throughout August 8th. Continue all defensive preparations. American claims assessed as psychological warfare. No change to operational planning. They were going to keep fighting. 4,000 miles away, the question of until what was about to be answered. Part 5. The Soviet Hammer Falls. While the committee debated the reality of Hiroshima, Japan's diplomatic corps clung to a different hope. For months, the foreign minister had been conducting secret negotiations through Japan's embassy in Moscow. The strategy convinced Stalin to mediate a peace settlement. In exchange for territorial concessions, the Soviets would broker terms that preserved the emperor's position: no occupation, no war crimes trials, no complete surrender. It was Japan's final diplomatic card. Stalin had maintained diplomatic relations with Japan throughout the war. The two nations had signed a neutrality pact in 1941. Japanese intelligence assessed that Stalin, exhausted from the European war, would prefer negotiation to invasion. They were catastrophically wrong. What they had failed to grasp was that Stalin had already committed to entering the Pacific War at the Yalta Conference in February. In exchange for territorial gains in Manchuria, he had promised Roosevelt and Churchill to attack Japan within 3 months of Germany's surrender. Germany surrendered on May 8th. 3 months later, Stalin was ready to collect. At 11 p.m. on August 8th, the Japanese ambassador received an urgent summons to the Kremlin. He arrived at midnight to find the Soviet foreign minister waiting. No tea was offered, no pleasantries exchanged. The message took less than 30 seconds. The Soviet Union considers itself in a state of war with Japan as of August 9th, 1945. The ambassador tried to respond. He was dismissed. The transmission reached Tokyo at 4 a.m. Months of negotiation. All of it had been an illusion. Within hours, reports from Manchuria confirmed the nightmare. Soviet forces numbering 1.5 million troops had crossed the border. The Kwantung Army, once Japan's premier fighting force, was being systematically destroyed. The Supreme War Council convened an emergency session that morning, not to discuss Hiroshima, but the Soviet invasion. The war minister's response was immediate. "We fight them as we fight the Americans, with every resource, with every life." "To what end?" an admiral asked. "We face enemies from all directions, Soviet armies from the north, American forces from the south, and weapons that can destroy cities." "One bomb," the war minister replied. "Perhaps two. The Americans cannot have unlimited supplies." Then a junior officer entered the room without knocking. His face was ashen. "Sir, Nagasaki. Part 6. The second bomb at 11:02 a.m. on August the 9th. A second atomic bomb detonated over Nagasaki, 300 miles southwest of Hiroshima. This weapon was different. Fat Man was more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Nagasaki hadn't even been the primary target. Cloud cover over Kokura had forced the bomber to divert. Another 40,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would follow. The Americans hadn't been bluffing. They had multiple atomic weapons, and they were prepared to use them. American intelligence recorded the intercepted Japanese communications. Second special type bomb confirmed. Casualties similar to Hiroshima. We have no defensive measures. But also, incredibly, continued resistance. One intercepted message read, "Despite enemies' use of new weapons, fighting spirit of Imperial forces remains undiminished. All units will prepare for decisive homeland defense." 2 atomic bombs, a Soviet invasion, and they were still talking about fighting. Japan's government was paralyzed. The Supreme War Council consisted of 6 men, 3 who recognized that continued resistance meant national suicide, and 3 who believed death with honor was preferable to surrender. They were deadlocked. The session stretched past midnight. The same arguments, the same refusals. Prime Minister Suzuki adjourned the meeting at 2 a.m., knowing they had achieved nothing. The decision was beyond the council's ability to resolve. Only one authority remained who could break the deadlock, and he had never been asked before. Part 7. The Emperor Speaks. The Imperial Conference reconvened near midnight on August 9th in the underground shelter beneath the palace. General Anami stood at the war table. His voice carried the certainty of a man who had made peace with death. We have 2 million soldiers under arms, defensive positions throughout the homeland. Every citizen can become a weapon. The Americans will face casualties so severe they will be forced to negotiate. He was describing Operation Ketsu-Go, the plan to transform Japan into a nation of resistance. Civilian volunteer corps were already being conscripted across the country. Men aged 15 to 60, women aged 17 to 40, armed with whatever could be found. The plan anticipated 28 million civilians participating in the final defense. An admiral responded, "How many atomic bombs can we endure? 3, 5, 10. Then we die with honor," Anami replied. The debate spiraled through the same arguments. 3 members advocated surrender, 3 refused. At 2 a.m. on August the 10th, Prime Minister Suzuki made a decision that violated every precedent of Japanese governance. "We are deadlocked. There is only one authority capable of resolving this. I propose we seek the Emperor's judgment." What Suzuki suggested was unprecedented. Emperor Hirohito existed above politics. He did not break tie votes. He did not resolve disputes. But no one could argue against seeking imperial guidance without questioning the Emperor's authority itself. At 2:30 a.m., Emperor Hirohito entered the room. The 6 council members bowed until their foreheads nearly touched the table. The silence was absolute. Hirohito was 44 years old, slight of build, wearing his military uniform without decoration. He had been kept informed of every development: the atomic bombs, the Soviet invasion, the deadlock. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "I have listened to the arguments. I understand the desire to fight on, but I have seen the photographs of cities that no longer exist. I have read the casualty estimates. Continuing the war means the annihilation of the Japanese people. The enemy possesses weapons against which we have no defense. If we persist, we will not die with honor. We will simply cease to exist as a nation. The unendurable must be endured. The unbearable must be borne. I order the government to accept the Potsdam Declaration and surrender." The Emperor had spoken the unspeakable. For some in the room, relief was immediate. For others, his words felt like death itself. But the order had been given. Japan would surrender. Part 8. The last rebellion. The decision triggered immediate consequences. Within hours, hardline officers began plotting a coup. Major Kenji Hatanaka, a 22-year-old in the War Ministry, believed the Emperor had been misled. Their plan: seize the Imperial Palace, destroy the recording of the surrender broadcast, continue the war. American intelligence intercepted fragments of the conspiracy. Palace security can be overcome. Destroy the broadcast before transmission. On the evening of August 14th, Hirohito recorded his surrender message, 4 minutes and 45 seconds, that would be broadcast the following day at noon. The recording was hidden in a palace safe. That night descended into chaos. Hatanaka and his co-conspirators convinced a regiment of Imperial Guards to join them by falsely claiming senior leaders supported the coup. When a general refused to participate, Hatanaka shot him dead. The rebels occupied the palace grounds and searched desperately for the recording. They ransacked offices throughout the night but couldn't find it. By dawn, loyal troops had surrounded the palace. The rebels were confronted and convinced to stand down. At 11 a.m. on August 15th, Less than an hour before the broadcast, Hatanaka took his own life. In his pocket was a death poem. I have nothing to regret now that the dark clouds have disappeared from the reign of the emperor. War Minister Anami had already taken his own life in the early hours, leaving a note. Believing firmly that our sacred land shall never perish, I humbly apologize to the emperor for the great crime. At noon, the recording played across every radio in Japan. For the first time in history, the Japanese people heard their emperor's voice. Thin and distant, speaking in formal court language, many could barely understand. The speech never used the word surrender, but the message was unmistakable. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Should we continue to fight, it would result in the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation. Across Japan, people knelt and wept, some from relief, some from shame, some from the exhaustion of surviving. The war was over. Part 9. What the records revealed in September 1945. American intelligence teams entered Tokyo to understand how Japan's leadership had made their decisions. What they found was disturbing in its clarity. Japanese intelligence had been accurate, remarkably, painfully accurate. Reports dating back to 1941 correctly estimated American industrial capacity. One document from 1943 predicted US aircraft production with near-perfect precision. Japanese analysts had correctly assessed that America was fighting the war while maintaining civilian production that exceeded Japan's total industrial output. The intelligence existed. The data was correct. Leadership had simply chosen not to believe it. During interrogations, one general provided the most honest assessment. We convinced ourselves that courage could overcome industrial capacity, that fighting spirit would triumph over material superiority. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence reports. We confused what we wanted to be true with what was actually true. Dr. Nishina, reviewing the scale of the Manhattan Project, calculated numbers that seemed impossible. 130,000 workers, facilities spanning multiple states, expenditures exceeding $2 billion. They built entire cities to produce these weapons, he said, while fighting on 3 continents. We attempted something similar with 500 scientists and a budget that couldn't purchase a single bomber. But the most significant discovery was the operational plans for Operation Ketsu-Go, Japan's planned defense of the homeland. Every civilian would become a combatant. Schools would become weapons factories. The plan anticipated casualties in the millions, with total annihilation accepted as preferable to surrender. American casualty estimates for invading Japan projected 400,000 to 800,000 deaths. Japanese estimates ranged from 5 to 10 million. Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed between 150,000 and 246,000 people. Operation Ketsu-Go would have killed millions more. A classified report compiled after the war reached a stark conclusion. The true danger revealed by this conflict is not nuclear weapons, but the human capacity for self-delusion. Japanese leadership received accurate intelligence and possessed rational analysis. They chose to ignore all of it in favor of ideology and wishful thinking. In 1952, a cenotaph was erected in Hiroshima's Peace Memorial Park. The inscription reads, "Please rest in peace, for the error will not be repeated." The phrase deliberately avoids specifying who made the error, not just Japan, not just America, not just those who built the bombs or those who refused to surrender. The error was universal. The human tendency to believe comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. American intelligence recorded everything. The denials after Hiroshima, the committee formed to disprove rather than investigate, the resistance after Nagasaki, the coup to prevent surrender. 9 days of delusion, captured on tape reels, documenting humanity's capacity for fatal self-deception. The bombs ended the war. The question they left behind remains unanswered. If this story resonated, subscribe for more untold chapters of history. Until next time.